Hi, gang. In the last video, we ended with the store procedure for number 3, and that was to create a store procedure that populates the sales rep history table with sales rep data when called. As I mentioned to you, that the purpose for doing this is to illustrate how you can easily populate a logging table or a sales rep or any historical table, time variant table, with the base table's data. So if you didn't have a product history table, if you didn't have a sales rep history table, and you wanted to create one, you could easily do so using this store procedure. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly, I already demonstrated this, I'm just going to quickly show it in grid view so it's easier to see. Again, here is the store procedure, and because it's in grid view, these print lines won't work. So I'm showing the sales rep data, sales rep history data, deleting it, executing the store procedure, then showing the base table and the history table after the call. So here it is. Let me do this, and then we'll quickly move on to the triggers. Okay. So as you can see, it's a lot easier to read sometimes in the grid view. Sometimes the text view is better. And then, of course, you could also, if you wanted to, you could right-click on here and go to Results to a file if you wanted to as well. All right. So here is the sales rep data. Here's the sales rep history data. Here's the sales rep data when we invoke that call again. Populating the sales rep history table. Notice that, again, as I mentioned, the sales rep history table was modified because we deleted all this original data here. We deleted all of this, and so the auto increment is going to start at a new value. But what it did was it populated with all the data and more from the sales rep table. Okay? All the data from the sales rep table, including whether it was an insert, update, or delete. We got the date automatically. We got the system user, and we just indicated that the sales rep history date for just ease of data implementation. We just called the get date function twice here. Once for the modified attribute and once for the simulating the data coming from the sales rep table. So that's why you're seeing the dates the same over here. Here's a timestamp though, and here is just a date. Okay? And there's a modifier. The modifier is very important because you find out who modified that data. Remember, there's a difference between the system_user and the original _login function, as I mentioned in another video. Let's go to number 4. Number 4 is the trigger, and that is to create a trigger that automatically adds a record to the sales rep history table for every record added to the sales rep table. Now, this is a very important trigger. We did the same thing in MySQL, and I'm going to show you how to do this in SQL Server. So let's go to number 4 here. And we're not going to do the print function because we're going to show it in grid view. But here is the solution. Now, let's take a look at this in depth here. First of all, here's the create statement. Okay. Create trigger, name a trigger on sales rep. So the trigger is going to be on sales rep. And after an insert, what we have to do here is declare some variables. And the reason why I have to declare these variables is because of this. Unlike MySQL, where you could use the new keyword, well, I should say similar to MySQL, where you could use the new keyword and the old keyword. In Microsoft SQL Server, there are 2 system tables that you can use, and that is inserted and deleted. And that's exactly how they're spelled. They're case sensitive as well too. Inserted and deleted. The inserted table contains new rows for insert and update operations, and the deleted table contains the original rows for update and delete operations. So much the same way that you could use the new keyword for insert commands, as well as update, you would use the old keyword in MySQL for update and delete. You can't use old for insert. You can't use new for deleted, because there are no new values in a deleted statement, right? So this is it's similar to MySQL, but instead they're using actual virtual tables called inserted and deleted. So this is how we create our variables inside of the trigger. So inside of the trigger, we're going to create our variables using the declare keyword. And we're going to keep the variables using the names of the attributes, but suffixing the names with _v to indicate that they're a variable. In other words, why we're doing that is to show that while PER_ID is the actual name of the attribute in the sales rep history table, this, in fact, with the @ symbol and _v is easy to see that the _v is a variable. And that's the naming convention that I use. _v indicates it's a variable. So we declare our variables, then we have a select statement, and that select statement is saying that we're going to, whatever's in the inserted table, that virtual table, after an insert, and so after an insert in the sales rep table, we're going to create these variables, and then we're going to select on each one of those attributes. So we have the variables here, PER_ID, type, modified, modifier, date, sales rep, sales goal, total sales, total commission, notes. And what we're doing here is putting in data that comes from the inserted table. So PER_ID from the sales rep table, as you can see. From here, PER_ID, the new value will be put into a variable PER_ID_V. The next one, the sales rep history type, is going to be a literal value. We're saying it's an insert. How do we know that? Because the trigger is after insert. If it was an update, we put a U. If it was a delete, we put a D. When it's modified, we're going to use the getDate function. Who the modifier is, we could use either the system_user or, if we wanted to, the login, right? That login function that I talked about in a previous video. But here we're just going to keep it simple, the system user. The sales rep history date, again, we're going to use, just for simplicity's sake, we're going to use the getDate function. Here we're going to say also, we're going to use the sales rep year sales goal, and we're going to put that in the year sales goal variable. Because remember, there's a year sales goal for the current year, and then we could also insert that for sales rep history year sales goal. So each year we can put that into our history table. The current one is in the base table, sales rep, and then the historical data will be kept in the history table. We do the same thing for, we could say year-to-date sales, and for that year-to-date sales, what were the total sales for that particular year? We're going to put that into a variable. What was the commission for that particular year? And notes. And again, we're getting that from the inserted virtual table. Once we get that data from the sales rep table, what we're going to do then is insert it into the sales rep history table. How do we do that? Here are the attributes for the sales rep history table, as you can see right here. But look what we're doing. We're using the variables that we declared at the top, and we're just now inserting the values that are in those variables. Okay? If you have any questions about that, just please post them to the discussion board or send me an email. Here is the code. This is the correct answer right here, gang. That's it, right there. Okay? Now let's run this just to see how it works. So I'm going to start from dropping the trigger, creating the trigger. Now what I'm going to do here is select the data before the trigger fires. I have to have a firing mechanism. And that firing mechanism is that it's going to be an insert into the sales rep table, the new values here, and then I'm going to, that's going to fire the trigger. So I'm going to capture the values before the trigger was fired and capture them after, and then see what they look like. So let's do that. Okay, here we go. Here's the sales rep table right here. You could see data here. Here's the history table. Now, notice there are 5 records here. There are 5 records here as well, too. Now, because of the store procedure before, they start 6 through 10 rather than 1 through 5. Remember, in the previous store procedure, we deleted the original values to show you how to populate a table based upon another table's data. But still, here is both of these, the sales rep table before the trigger is fired, sales rep history table before the trigger is fired. We fire the trigger, and now notice we have a 6th record. Well, automatically, what that trigger does, this is for the sales rep table, the base table. We see we have the 6th record. It automatically puts in this data right here in the sales rep history table. And it tells us who the user was, when it occurred, and it automatically keeps track of that new data. Okay? So you don't have to do anything. This trigger does all the work for you. Every time there is a new sales rep inserted into the sales rep table, it will automatically populate the sales rep history table. Okay? A very good way of doing a logging mechanism or tracking time variant data. All right, gang, let's go to number 5. What is number 5? Number 5 is create a trigger that automatically adds a record to the product history table for every record added to the product table. So it's very similar, but we're doing the product history instead. We could do this with an insert, update, and delete as well. Let's take a look at the solution itself. Here's the solution. You could pause that. Notice it is a trigger that is going to be invoked on the product history table, but it's after an insert on the product table. So again, the base table here is product. The affected table, after there's an insert in product, the affected table is product history. Before, the base table was sales rep. After the sales rep table was, there was an insert, it affected the sales rep history table. Let's go to the code. There's a couple different things here. We still have to do our variables as we did in the previous trigger. However, I'm indicating here to you that you can put for the, we don't have them, but I put here as a note that we could add additional attributes that could be added to the table for further historical documentation. So let's take a look at it. In this history table, in this particular table, we don't have whether it's an insert, update, and delete. Now, we could include that. We could include that if we made an alter statement to this history table, but this one is not tracking that. All we're tracking here is the date, the cost, the price, and the discount. But I put in the notes here that we could add a product history type if we want to indicate whether it's an insert, update, and delete, and the modifier. Again, we don't have a modifier in this particular design. We could if we wanted to, but we don't. Okay? So we're leaving those out, but we do have a date when it was modified. So that way we need that variable. So product ID, when it was modified, the cost, price, discount, notes. And what we're doing here is, again, we can use the inserted virtual table that SQL Server provides. Remember that SQL Server provides these two tables for us. Right? An inserted table and a deleted table. We get that from SQL Server. So just like we did in the solution number 4, solution number 5 is similar in that we're going to select the data from our inserted table. That means whatever's inserted into product will go into these variables, and then we can just use an insert statement to populate the product history table. Okay? So again, here's the code. It's going to be insert on product. When there's an insert on product, we're going to insert into the product history table. Let's run this. Okay, I'm going to drop it if it exists, which it doesn't, but if it did, I drop it. Create it. I'm going to list the data for both the product and product history table before the trigger's fired. Remember, it'll be fired after an insert. And then I'm going to list it after the trigger is fired, both from the product and the product history table. Copy that and go here into my query window, Control A, Control V, paste it, run it, F5. Okay, let's take a look. Here's a product table. There's 5 records. Here's a product history table. There are 5 records. Now look what happens to the product table. We added a 6th record right here. Okay? Take a look at that. Here's our 6th record. Now look that it automatically was added to the sales rep. The product history table. So the product table added this. We didn't add the product name because we felt that it wasn't necessary. We just added the product ID, the timestamp, what the cost was. Notice the cost. Hopefully my connection will return, and it did, thankfully. We notice the cost, $5.98, the price is $11.99. That's all captured in our product history table, okay? Including the timestamp of when it was modified. All right. Here, actually, it wasn't a timestamp. Here was a date value. Because the product history date, we're not keeping track of. Notice I use the get date function in the code. I use the get date function rather than get timestamp. You can get the timestamp as well too, but I just use get date. All right. So that is number 5. We created a view in number 1, store procedure number 2, store procedure number 3, a trigger number 4, and a trigger in number 5. Here's the extra credit. Create a stored procedure that updates the sales rep yearly sales goal in the sales rep table based upon 8% more than their previous year's total sales. Name it. Yeah, that's not a good name. I told you that in SQL Server, SP underscore is used as a for the intrinsic, the built-in store procedures. So not a good naming function. There was a carryover that I've used for naming store procedures in MySQL. Shouldn't have a problem with this because it's doubtful that SQL Server has a store procedure like this, that name. But you probably want to just keep it. You could just name it annual underscore sales rep underscore sales underscore goal without the prefix, without the SP underscore prefix. All right, let's look at the code. Now, again, this is from number 5. That's your answer for number 5. Let's look at the code. You could pause that. Let's look at the extra credit. Here is the solution for the extra credit. Now let's look at this. So you're going to create a store procedure that updates the sales rep's yearly sales goal in the sales rep table. You're going to update the yearly sales goal in the sales rep table based upon the sales rep's previous year's sales goal. Or I'm sorry, previous year's total sales. The previous year's total sales. So there isn't a total sales here in the sales rep table. There's a current year-to-date sales. We'd get the total sales at the very end of the year, and then we just push that over to the sales rep history table, where in fact the sales rep history table has the rep's yearly total sales. Okay, so what do? Well, since the sales rep table doesn't have the previous year's total sales, what we're going to do is we're going to get it from the sales rep history table. So let's take a look at the real code that's happening here. We're going to update the sales rep table. We're going to set the sales rep year sales goal based upon the sales rep history year total sales 8% more than the previous year's total sales. Okay? Now, what we have to do here is a join. So we're going to update it from the sales rep table, join the sales rep history table, and we're going to join it on what? We're going to join it on that primary key, foreign key relationship. PER_ID in the sales rep table, PER_ID in the sales rep history table. We're going to make that join. And then, because we only have recent data, right? We don't have any historical data because it's all test data. We only have recent data here. What we're going to do is where the sales rep history date is equal to the most recent date. How do we get the most recent date? By using the max function. Where the sales rep history date is equal to the most recent date in the sales rep history table. So we're going to just find out where the sales rep history date, the most recent date, if we actually had last year's date, we can call up last year literally. So you could say where sales rep history date equals 2016 if you wanted to, or whatever year, 2010, 2004, whatever year you wanted to, you could pick a year and just wrap it in single or double quotation marks. Here we're using the function max for the most recent date because we only have a few records and all of those records are recent. So here's the code. Okay, let's drop the procedure, create the procedure. By the way, this is how you would update it from one table to another table. You just update the table name, set the table column 1 equals the other table column 1. You do the same thing. It was more than one table, more than one attribute or column that was being updated. From the table, inner join. Notice the inner keyword is optional. Don't have to use that. And then based upon the primary key, foreign key relationship. And any conditional clause. Notice we do have a conditional clause. Where is the most recent date? And you would do the same thing in MySQL. Okay, do the same thing in MySQL. All right, so I'm going to include the comments in there, and they're not going to be invoked. They're not going to be executed. So I'm just going to do that, include the comments. I'm going to show the table data before the call. I'm going to execute. I'm going to make a call to the store procedure and then show the data after the call. But I'm only going to show the data for the sales rep table because that's all we care about. We don't care about the sales rep history data because that's not going to be modified. The only thing that's going to be modified is the sales rep table. We're going to update that to 8% based upon the previous year's yearly total sales. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in there and show you what to look for. All right. What we have here is the let's see, what did I include in that? Select all from product history. Sorry about that. I didn't copy what I thought I copied. I was from the previous copy. So I'm going to copy this. This is from what we're doing right now. That was the previous. As you can see, I still had product history in my buffer, and I pasted that by accident. That was a trigger. This is for the extra credit. So I'm going to copy the procedure, the table data before the call, and then just the sales rep table. There, I copied it correctly this time. I'm going to Control A, Control V. You could see that I am doing the sales rep correctly, not the product table. And we're only going to see 3 result sets. Here is the sales rep data. Okay. All right. What do we want to do again? We want to create a store procedure that updates the sales rep's yearly sales goal in the sales rep table, the base table, based upon 8% more than the previous year's total sales. And we got to find that from the sales rep history table. Okay. And sorry, that was my phone. And what we're going to do here is get the sales rep history data right here. Notice we got that, all 6 records. But what we're looking at in the sales rep history table is the sales rep history yearly total sales. Okay? And if you look initially, look at the sales rep yearly sales goal here. This is their current sales goal. Now, based upon the previous years, here we're just using the most recent, look at the previous years, simulating that. The previous years are different from their current sales goal, right? So here's their current yearly sales goal. Here are their previous year's total sales, and based upon that, we're going to change their yearly sales goals to 8% above that. Okay, so quickly take a look at the 60,000 there, and you could see that 64.8 is 8%. You could see that 37.8 is 8% of 35,000 in the previous years, etc., etc. So this person ID 3 had the previous year total sales of 84,000. Now their current is 8% more. And you can see how all of the new sales rep yearly sales goals are correctly modified to 8%. Okay? All right, gang. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to post them to the discussion board or send me an email. Here is the correct store procedure for that. Feel free to test it out and then let me know how it works for you. All right, gang. If you have any questions, please, again, post them to the DB. See you in class.